Welcome to yet another in the series of Perth U.S. Asia Center Foreign Policy Conversations, virtual or in person. This is one of the highlights of my days, a chance to have conversations with friends old and new about developments of import to Australia, to the United States, to the Indo-Pacific more broadly. And I can't think of anyone that I would rather have one of these conversations with than our guest today, Admiral/Ambassador Harry Harris. I think Ambassador Harris or Admiral Harris needs really no introduction to our community. When the Perth U.S. Asia Center was established way back in 2013 and kicked off its programming in 2014, one of our very first speakers was then the commander of the United States Pacific Command in Hawaii. Admiral Harris came down to Perth to attend the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. And from that day on, we have benefited tremendously from his expertise, his career, and his leadership on issues such as the Indo-Pacific that impact the Perth U.S. Asia Center. He finished his career, a long career in the U.S. Navy, as a four-star admiral. I understand, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, Admiral, as the only P3 pilot ever to get 4 stars. Also the only graduate of the Junior Navy ROTC to get 4 stars.
I was the first P3 flyer to get a 4-star. Bill Moran followed me, and Bill's a close friend. I'm not a pilot. I'm a navigator, so I'm a backseater, TACO, and our tactical coordinator in the P3 community, of which the Royal Australian Air Force knows well.
Well, now that I'm getting clarifications, you're going to have to clarify one thing to me. I understand you held 2 very coveted titles that go beyond Ambassador Admiral. One was Old Goat, and the second one I think was Gray Owl. Can you give us a little bit of background on that helps?
Yeah, so I'm going to get a prop here. Just hang on for a second. So this is the Gray Owl. The Gray Owl is it's awarded to the naval flight officer, the backseater, the TACO, if you will, who has held that designation the longest and still be on active duty. So this is the Gray Owl. This thing here is supposed to be an owl, and that's what that's all about. At the same time, I received the coveted Old Goat Award, which is simply the guy who graduated from the Naval Academy, still on active duty the longest. So both of these reflect nothing more than being old. But at the same time, I held both titles.
Well, in addition to those titles, you added a diplomatic one as well, appointed to be ambassador to the Republic of Korea. I did note that many people here in Australia had high hopes that you would be ambassador to Australia, but given the nature of the last 5 years, I think your services were well needed and much appreciated in South Korea. So on behalf of the Perth U.S. Asia Center, thank you so much for making time for this conversation and for your leadership. If I might just kind of kick off big picture to tie our conversation about your career in with the issues that we're dealing with. When you were at the U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii, you were very instrumental in socializing in the United States the usage of the term Indo-Pacific. In fact, shortly after your departure, and I think probably because of your leadership on that, we changed the name of the U.S. Pacific Command to the United States Indo-Pacific Command. And I wonder if you might just kind of give a broader assessment of the broad sweep of your career over the evolution of the Indo-Pacific and the U.S. role in that region.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and I think it's fundamental to where both of our countries are. I'll just give a little background to round out what you said. Yeah. So when I was in Hawaii, I started referring to the region as the Indo-Asia Pacific. So we had previously called it the Asia Pacific, but I felt after my trip to Perth that you talked about, and after my trips to India, I was there for the inaugural, the second and the third Rising Dialogues in 2016, 2017, and 2018. I felt that Asia Pacific was too limiting, and a more accurate title would be Indo-Asia Pacific. And then I made a formal request to the Secretary of Defense, who was Ash Carter at the time, that we should change the name of PACOM to Indo-PACOM. I felt that it's more reflective of the area of responsibility. You know, we say jokingly, and I said it often, that my responsibility area covered from Hollywood to Bollywood and penguins to polar bears. But in actuality, you know, Indo-Pacific is far more accurate and far more encompassing than just PACOM. And, you know, I suppose I could have asked for the name change to be Indo-Asia Pacific Command, but that is simply too long. You know, there is a selling part of this. You know, there's how do you pitch this? How do you talk about it? How do you pronounce it? And Indo-Asia Pacific Command is simply too big. But Indo-PACOM, you know, that's how it would be abbreviated, shortened, is pretty good. 5 syllables, I think, and you know, I think we can handle that in normal conversation. Indo-PACOM. So I made that recommendation to Secretary Carter. He said no. You know, he had his reasons, I'm sure, but he rejected it. And when Secretary Mattis took the helm, I simply made the same recommendation again. He immediately understood what I was getting at, and immediately understood the value and efficacy of that moniker. And so he agreed wholeheartedly and worked through it. You know, you can't just do this at the drop of a hat. And so at my change of command in May of 2018, he formally announced it. So for about 20 to 30 minutes, I was the commander of United States Indo-PACOM. And then I turned over to Phil Davidson, who then, you know, was the Indo-PACOM commander. So that's the background on that.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I was keenly aware of your leading presence at the Raisina dialogue in India, because in some respects, again, while it may go from penguins to polar bears, at a fundamental level, the changing nature of Pacific Command, the Indo-Pacific Command, has a lot to do with India. And how do you incorporate India into the Asia Pacific in a serious way? So did you see, in addition to the change of the title, shifting dynamics in the region that made that title more appropriate for where we are today and where we're likely to go in the future?
Well, yes, in a word, I believed in 2016 when I keynoted at Raisina, that we should bring back the Quad, right? So the Quad had been extant, had diminished around the 2008 timeframe, and lay fallow for 8 years or so. So in Raisina 2016, I called for the resurgence of the Quad. And, you know, in some quarters, including in some quarters of the US media, I was ridiculed for that. And other quarters, I was supported for making that call. And so, but that was in 2016. And it took a while to get all the players on board, including players in our government. And so I was gratified to see that we were pushing forward with the Quad, the whole concept of the Quad and what it is and what it's doing. And I was pleased that the first big thing with the Quad was to get after the COVID issue, inoculations, the vaccines. The Quad is not just military, and it's not meant to be exclusionary either. You know, I joke about American college football. You know, the Big Ten conference has 14 teams. The Big 12 conference has 10 teams. So there's nothing that says the Quad has to have only 4 teams. But at the time, in 2016, I called for the resurgence of the Quad, because I think that grouping, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States, is fundamentally important to the region and areas beyond simply security. And we can talk about AUKUS later. I think we will, and I can give you a different view of that, which is all about security in my mind.
Well, look, your speech in 2016 and your advocacy is looking really good this week. I think, you know, in March of this year, we had the first ever leaders virtual summit of the Quad leaders. And this coming Friday, so Friday, the 24th of September, we're going to have the first in-person meeting of the leaders of Japan, India, Australia, United States. So
yeah,
again,
I think it's
you're on the
really
right
good.
side there.
Yeah. So sometimes you're on the right side of history, sometimes maybe you're not. But in this case, you know, it was all good.
Well, let's turn now to your ambassadorial hat. You had a distinguished tenure in one of the most challenging posts in terms of the issues that people work on, that being the Korean Peninsula. You know, just in the last week alone, you've seen North Korea test train-mounted ballistic missiles, other ballistic missiles. South Korea, newly kind of released from some of the strictures on it, tested a submarine-launched ballistic missile. There are not new, but long-standing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. And you were kind of front and center in dealing with those tensions over nearly 4 years as ambassador. I wonder if you could give us your assessment of where the Korean Peninsula stands today.
Yeah, I think the Korean Peninsula is in a reasonably good place. I mean, it's a heck of a lot better place now than it was when I was the PACOM commander in 2017, really, when you had the Fire and Fury and Little Rocket Man and you know, Kim Jong-un was testing ballistic missiles willy-nilly, you know, nuclear weapons and all that. Korea and the Korean Peninsula was an incredibly tense place in 2017. Vastly different now. You know, even with the submarine-launched ballistic missile test that South Korea did, which I supported, I think it makes them a stronger ally. And congratulations to their Navy for doing it and developing it. And the ongoing short-range ballistic missile tests that North Korea has done, which I think in the long run will hurt us because, you know, they're able to test and refine their ability to target with their missiles, their cruise missiles, and all of that. So even with all of that, the Korean Peninsula is a lot different now, COVID notwithstanding, of course, but it's a lot different now than it was at the height of Fire and Fury in 2017. I think there are three things or so that are important to keep in mind that I think that we need to do. And I say we, in this case, I'm talking about South Korea and the United States as alliance partners. And I have no insight to this after my time in Korea as an ambassador. You know, I try to stay abreast of the news and I see the same news that everyone else sees. But I think that the three important things that we have to keep in the forefront is we have to ensure our continued ability to defend the peninsula together, right? So this means our militaries. This is the military dimension of what I'm getting at here. So this is the combined force, the South Korean military and the US military, and all the plans and all the pieces of that combined force. We have to continue to keep that strong, and we have to continue to exercise it. You know, there are calls from different quarters to reduce the exercises, to eliminate the joint exercises, and that kind of stuff. I think that's a bad idea, and to date we haven't really done it. We haven't canceled maybe a selected exercise here or there, but in the broad brush, we continue to train together and work together, and that's vitally important because the North Koreans are simply unpredictable, you know, and we don't know what they're going to do, and we have to be ready for any eventuality. So that's one. We have to, I think, not relax sanctions. We must not relax the tough, crushing United Nations Security Council resolution sanctions on North Korea. Now, in both cases, both the sanctions piece and the combined exercise piece, if a reduction in either or both comes as an outcome of negotiations between North Korea and us and South Korea, if a reduction in exercises and sanctions is an outcome of negotiations, that's great. I mean, that's why you have negotiations. You know, the parties get together, they discuss what's working, what's, whatever. And then if an outcome is a reduction of an exercise, a reduction of sanctions or whatever, that's why you have negotiations. But to reduce sanctions and or reduce exercises as an enticement to get the North Koreans to come back to the negotiating table, I think that is a recipe for disaster. You know, this is akin to the apocryphal definition of insanity by Einstein, right? You do the same experiment over and over again and hope for a different outcome. So I'm opposed to reducing either, unless it's a decision that's an outcome of negotiations. And the third thing is, the door is open for negotiations. President Biden and his team have made it clear, in my view, at least according to the media, they have made it clear that they are willing to negotiate. The door is open. So it's up to Kim Jong-un to simply walk through an open door to achieve a brighter future for his country and his people.
One of the things that I think few in the region really understand is how much your two roles were synergistic. I observed in the 25 years I spent in Washington, D.C., that the commander of Pacific Command, or now Indo-Pacific Command, had such a broad remit that there was a need to understand not just the security developments, but the political and economic other developments in the region. And so it's not a surprise. You and I were just chatting about Ambassador Jane Hardy, the previous Australian Consul General to Honolulu, who we often referred to as the ambassador to Indo-PACOM, right? Because that's the nature of that role. And it's pretty clear to me that there has been a lot of kind of carryover between your time in Honolulu and your time in Seoul.
Yeah, I would agree with you there that, there were a lot of aspects of the ambassador job that I had very little, if any, experience with. And a lot of that involved trade, the trade portfolios, economics, and that side of the house. But the big part that I was completely familiar with was the security dimension. And I think it was easier in my case to learn all of the nuances of the economic side of the house, rather than someone else who might have to learn all of the nuances of the security dimension, which are enormous. So, but be that as it may, I struggled in a lot of places. I had a lot of help from my American colleagues in the embassy and the Koreans who worked in the embassy and my friends in the Korean government that helped me and carried me really for the 2.5 years that I was ambassador.
You mentioned that you were pleased that the Quad had focused on vaccine diplomacy. And in fact, the initial agenda of the Quad that was announced on the leaders meeting back in March, and which we anticipate will be on the table again in this week, is climate change. It looks at vaccines. It looks at security of supply chains, et cetera. And those are all decidedly not the initial hard security that we had underneath the Quad. You referenced earlier AUKUS, this newly announced Australia, UK, US security partnership. And the heart of that has been not just a technology sharing agreement, but some new subs for Australia. I realize you're not a submariner, but obviously as the commander of Indo-PACOM and as somebody who's looked at it from the region, I'd really like to get your initial take on this kind of groundbreaking announcement of US, UK, Australia kind of security partnership in this region?
Yeah. So one, I think the name is awkward, but I think you and I have mentioned it at least a half a dozen times in the short time that we've been talking. So I think the name AUKUS is here to stay. I don't know another one unless we add another country came in or something like that. But I think AUKUS is it for the time being, unfortunately. As far as the substance, it is, in my view, very welcome. And this idea of the nuclear submarine piece for Australia is the right thing, one, and two, it's very exciting. So I was asked by one of the American media outlets what I thought was a naive question, but I've been doing this all my career. I mean, and maybe it's not a naive question for a lot of people, especially Americans who might be focused on other things. But the question was, why is a nuclear submarine better than a conventional submarine? Well, I mean, yes, in every way. I mean, in speed and depth and stealth, payload, the whole thing. And it is what makes a country a blue water Navy country. And that's why there are only half a dozen or so countries in the world that have nuclear submarines, right? The United States, the PRC, Russia, France, the UK, and India. These are the only nuclear submarine capable countries in the world. We have only nuclear submarines, and France Russia and the PRC have both versions. But the nuclear submarine is an order of magnitude more capable and better than a conventional powered diesel submarine. So while I was surprised at the question, I hope I gave a textured answer to why a country would prefer nuclear submarines over diesel submarines. The idea that we've only shared our nuclear submarine technology with one other country in our history is relevant here, and that's the UK in the 1950s. And now together, the UK and the United States will share that technology with Australia. I think that's terrific. This is a security-centric pact. I'm not sure what, at the end of the day, what the noun is going to be, a pact, treaty, I'm not sure. Because we're already allies in different dimensions, right? We're allied with the Brits and NATO. We're allied with Australia and ANZUS, though we've tabled the NZ part of that for the time being. But this is an important relationship, and it will measurably improve the capability of the Royal Australian Navy. Now I know that there are some bitterness, I suppose, in France over this. But as I mentioned to the American outlet earlier this week, countries act in their enlightened self-interest. And all of us do that. All of our countries do that. France did that. France does that. And so this is a manifestation of that. But the capability, again, is so different, is so much bigger with a nuclear submarine capability than a conventional capability, that I think that it was the right decision to make. And I'm glad that from an outsider looking in now, I'm glad that the United States and the UK decided to help in the technology aspects of this, which is not insignificant.
Well, we're quickly running out of time, but let me kind of tie our conversation on Korea and the conversation we've just had with AUKUS and the Quad kind of together a little bit, if I might. Australia has been very proactive in the Quad. It's been very, very proactive now in seeking to deepen its alliance relationship with the United States, and now in AUKUS in the process, but also very proactive in evangelizing the Indo-Pacific construct. Korea, on the other hand, has been a little bit reticent, I think probably on all three. So I'm kind of wondering, knowing Australia as well as you do, looking at it from your time in the Indo-PACOM and your time as ambassador in Korea, could you tell us, could you just reflect a little bit on Korea's global role, their involvement with things like the Quad or AUKUS or the Indo-Pacific more broadly?
Yeah, so there's a lot there, Gordon.
To sneak in the last question, I realized.
Yeah, there's a lot there to parse out. I do think that South Korea is reluctant even, to be forced to choose between the United States on the one hand and the PRC on the other. Now, I was often asked when I was ambassador by my South Korean interlocutors, are you asking us to choose? And my answer then is as it is now, and that is no, we're not asking you to choose between your number one trading partner on the one hand and your only security ally on the other. And when I reminded them was that the United States made a choice in our relationship, and we made that choice in 1950. And then South Korea made a choice to join formally an alliance with us in 1953. PRC also made a choice in 1950, and they and North Korea together chose to ally with each other in 1961. So this issue of choices is a false narrative designed, in my view, to sow discord between us and our South Korean ally. So, I think we can move beyond the issue of choices. But that said, South Korea is reluctant to join the Quad. There are voices in South Korea that are calling for them to join the Quad. As I said before, there's nothing that's limiting about the number in the Quad. But there are other voices that are opposed to it. And they would be, I think, very reticent to join a security-focused, security-centric organization, a pact like AUKUS. I don't think they could do that with their political climate in South Korea today. Now, they are having an election coming up in the spring of next year. And depending on the outcome of that, their view might change. I think this issue of South Korea's alliance relationship with the United States and economic relationship with PRC, I think part of that is being debated, and it's a good debate to have. But they'll make the right decision for them, as all sovereign countries do. So I look forward to watching that debate, not taking part in it, but watching it as closely as I can, and then seeing what the outcome is come next spring.
Well, thank you so much. Whether here in Perth or in Honolulu or in Seoul or at the Raisina Dialogue in Delhi or in Washington, D.C., your views are incisive and insightful, and we very much appreciate you sharing them with us today. So look forward to future conversations, and thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Gordon. Thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue with you.